I just came straight from the train, which was from another train, which was from Chadera. My wife and children are still in Chadera, and I took the train back from there. The Jewish people are so beautiful. I just have to share that with all of you. You know, in Yerushalayim, so we know the Jewish people are beautiful here, but throughout all of Eretz Yisrael, it was pouring rain, as it was, I'm sure, here as well there. And I davened this morning, Shachris. Before we get started, this has nothing to do with this year, by the way. You'll cut it out afterwards if you see fit. I walked into davening, pouring rain, absolutely pouring rain. And one after another, gentlemen, age is just a concept, but one after another, gentlemen, the ages 70 and above, I think I was for sure the youngest there, were coming in to daven Shachris. I don't know, it's something that when you're out in the, further reaches of Eretz Yisrael, or you're in a small town, Chadera, there's like lots of small buildings there, and you see people they weren't coming even on car, they had their little umbrellas and they walked in with such tzmimus, with such pshitos, with such simplicity, and I was just moved to the core at wherever you are. I didn't even know where I was going to find the minyan. I just got in the car, started driving around until I saw something that looked like a shul. And everywhere in the world where you are, especially in Eretz Yisrael, wherever you find yourself, you just look around, you'll find Jews of all ages, of all backgrounds, who are schlepping to shul in the rain, in the snow even. You'll see, unbelievable. So just one last little thing, because I can't help it. Where we were staying, my wife and I, we were staying overlooking this gigantic soccer field. And it was raining there also, and yet there were young boys, I don't know exactly how old they were, and they were out there, kicking around the soccer ball and doing drills with their coach. And, I said to my wife, I said, like, it's an unbelievable, this was earlier, this was like maybe yesterday at some point. I said, it's unbelievable, look at the dedication. If you're dedicated, I'm into it. I don't know, whatever it is. If you're dedicated, if you're skilled, I'm into it. So I was like, look how unbelievable that is. So my wife said, yeah, you'll use it in a shear sometime. That's what she said. Little did she know, this morning I was going to see that shear come to life. I didn't need to use it in any specific way here, but I walked into the shul and saw the same dedication from these people. It doesn't matter what age, doesn't matter what the weather is. Jewish people going to daven. It was a beautiful way to just start the day. Now we can get to the shir. I just wanted to introduce myself, properly, and part of my introducing myself is my love for the Jewish people and my love for Eretz Yisrael. So we'll put that to the side now, and I had to speak with my wife and my children, and now we can get to the content of the shir. We can get to the Torah itself. So I want to speak to you this morning about a large sugya. It's a long sugya. I'll try to be sensitive to the time, and I'm grateful to the clock in the back. And I'll begin by asking a question, and then we're going to go on a very circuitous route. The way that I like to study Torah is I like to see it as a puzzle. The question that I want to ask before I explain the methodology of how we're going to get to the answer is, why is it so hard for all of us, for myself included, why is it so hard for us to either A, admit that we need help when we need help? Why is it so difficult for us to say, I really can't do this by myself, I need someone else to help me? Because Torah should always be practical. So this is the practical, this is what I want, because it's going to be not practical for the next 25 minutes or so until we get back to the answer. Why is it so difficult for us to acknowledge that we need help? And on the flip side, why is it sometimes so difficult to be someone who is only in the helping role and not appreciated as the star of the show? Now, both of those actually psychologically are rooted in the same place. On the one hand, feeling like you need to ask somebody for help and being in the helping role and not being the star in the center seem to be opposites. But I think after we do a little bit of work together, we'll see that actually it comes from the same root, and we'll be able to take away something very practical that we can use not only for Chanuka, not to help prepare ourselves for Zos Chanuka, which is coming in a few days, but also something which is practical we can take with us for our entire lives. So let me tell you about my favorite Gemara in all of Shas. I don't know if you're allowed to. I was never told if you're allowed to or you're not allowed to have a favorite Gemara, but I have one. Shh, don't tell anyone. Luckily, it's not in the Bavli. I don't have a favorite Gemara in the Bavli. They're all equally beloved to me. In the Yerushalmi, though, I have a favorite Gemara. My favorite Gemara in Shas, in the Yerushalmi, is a Gemara in Maseches Rosh Hashanah in the Yerushalmi that says, Divrei Torah are aniyim b'mkoman v'ashirim b'makom acher. Sometimes the words of Torah are poor in their place, but they're rich elsewhere. What does that mean? Words of Torah are poor in their place, but they're rich elsewhere. So the Gemara proves this by citing a pasuk, which is going to come as a shock to most of you, especially since this is a room of, at this point, just me and all women. Before there was a cameraman here. But you know, Eishes Chayil that we sing to our sisters and wives and mothers and grandmothers. The Eishes Chayil, it's true, it is a song that we sing to our sisters and mothers and wives. It's also a song that was written to the Torah. The Torah is the quintessential feminine, kamateh, Torah. The Torah is also considered feminine, and it's a song which, if you look throughout Chazal, you see that they constantly darshan, they constantly learn these psukim as references to the Torah herself. So one of the verses in Eishes Chayil is, Haisa ka'anios socher. She was like a merchant ship. Now, I don't know about you, but my wife probably would not appreciate if I compared her to a merchant ship. You know, like if on Friday night I said, like, you are like a merchant ship. She probably, you know, I mean, I guess I do every Friday night, but let's try to explain what that means. Haisa ka'anios socher, she was like a merchant ship. Mimerchak tavi lachma, from far away she brings her bread. What do we know about merchant ships? So a merchant ship basically relies on one of the basic frameworks of all economics, which is supply and demand. If you have a product which is in high supply in one area and in low demand, put it on a ship and you bring it to a place where it's in high demand and low supply, and you make a killing on it. So she is like a merchant ship bringing things, from far away she brings her bread. She has some business savvy. But when applied to the Torah, say Chazal, it means sometimes you have words of Torah that are poor in their place, which means that in their immediate context, we don't necessarily know what to do with those words. You ever study Tanakh or Halacha and you come across some fine point of Halacha or of Jewish history found in, not just Jewish history, but the Jewish spiritual enterprise that's found in Tanakh? Did you ever come across something in Tanakh and you're like, I don't know why, this is supposed to be Ledoros, this is supposed to be for all generations. It was written down because it's eternally relevant. What in the world am I supposed to do with this? And at that moment, you have two choices. You could, and this is why it's my favorite Gemara, you could either say, the Torah is a giant puzzle. And if you've ever done a puzzle, you know that sometimes you'll come across a piece that you're not quite sure what to do with it yet, but that's just because you haven't found the island of relevant correlating pieces. And if you, chalila v'chas, if you, God forbid, throw away that piece, you're going to be really upset when you get to the end of the puzzle. Right? You need that piece, especially when you come to the end. There's that one little gaping hole. It's going to be very upsetting. And so when you're studying Torah, when I'm studying Torah, the lodestar, this Gemara in Maseches Rosh Hashanah and the Yerushalmi, that sometimes words of Torah are poor in their place, but they're rich elsewhere, is a statement that we should never, ever, ever think of any detail of the Torah as unnecessary. At best, or at worst, I would say, what we can or should do is put it to the side until we can come back to it. So here's a puzzle that I've been working on. The whole Torah is one gigantic puzzle. And they're all pieces are connected to each other if you know how to sail it properly. Here's a puzzle that I've been working on for upwards of 10 years, and I'm going to share it with you today in less than 40 minutes. The puzzle starts with a halacha, or rather a remez, which is brought down in Sifrei Halacha. It's brought down in the Sefer Eliyah Rabbah, which is the Sefer Halacha. And there, the Eliyah Rabbah says a very peculiar remez. The remez is that the word nechoshet, bronze or copper, is a mnemonic or is an acronym for Neirot Chanuka Shamash Tadlik. The candles of Chanukah should be lit by way of an agent, by a shamash, by a helper candle. Neirot Chanukah Shamash Tadlik. That's what the word nechoshes stands for. Now, this is very peculiar on multiple levels. First of all, why nechoshes? And second of all, just tell me that I'm supposed to light it with a shamash. I mean, there's a whole sugi in the Gemara, in Daf Chaf Aleph, in Maseches Shabbos, that talks about using an extra candle for a number of different reasons. We're not going to get into the lumdus of it right now. But we know that you're supposed to use a shamash. What do you need to give me an acronym and nechoshes and... Okay. So let's put that to the side for a minute and try to understand, we're going to get more puzzle pieces along the way. Let's try to understand what Nechoshet has to do with Chanuka. So, I have some friends here. I brought some friends. Let's start with a passage in Sefer Yechezkel. Sefer Yechezkel, Perek Chav Zayin, includes a kina on the port city of Tzor, an elegy, a eulogy before the downfall of Tyre. Tyre is a port city, a little bit north. And if Yechezkel was living nowadays, Yechezkel would probably have called this the dirge or the elegy for Amazon Prime. That's how I like to think of this, because that's exactly, as you'll see in a moment, what this prophecy of Yechezkel is all about. Yechezkel begins, the port city of Tzor. Tzor, we have a delicate relationship with Tzor. As opposed to Ammon and Moab, as opposed to some of the other surrounding nations who we have really bad relationships with, Tzor, actually, they were very instrumental in helping to build the Beis HaMikdash. We had very nice alliances with them throughout Jewish history at many different points. At other points, not so much. However, there's definitely a rivalry between Yerushalayim as an economic center and Tzor as an economic center. And when the Babylonians came and they destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, so this caused a psychological and political upheaval for Yerushalayim, because Tzor was now spared from Bavel. They were not destroyed by Bavel, and Yerushalayim was destroyed by Bavel. So part of Yechezkel's message in the restoration of Yerushalayim, the restoration of Eretz Yisrael, Yechezkel turns to the city of Tzor and says, don't gloat, because you are gloating. And he says, let me tell you a parable. God spoke to me and he said, let me tell you a parable. I want you to say the following elegy on Tzor. And what's amazing is that it's the most not subtle mashal, parable, you could ever have. And Yechezkel is filled with these not subtle parables. Yechezkel says, once upon a time, there was a boat called Tzor. Okay, not the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Tzor. There's a boat in the middle of the ocean called Tzor. Now, that's not such a subtle mashal for a port city called Tzor. And he says, well, this boat is out in the middle of the ocean, and all of the nations of the world are bringing their greatest good, whatever they have. The Swiss are bringing their watches or their chocolate, and the Japanese are bringing their cars and their microprocessors. Everybody's bringing their own, whatever their expertise is in. Each one with its own expertise, and every nation has its beautiful expertise. And I'm kidding, there's many beautiful things that are brought in from many of the nations of the world. And they all have their wares to sell. And this boat is sitting in the middle of the ocean, and it's receiving all of the different goods and services that are being provided by the various nations. And as the boat continues to load up, it loads up and loads up and loads up with more and more and more and more and more until finally it sinks to the bottom of the ocean. V'hamevin Yavin, says Yechezkel. And the one who understands should understand that, Tzor, you're headed down the wrong path. Your obsession with accumulation and being a center of commerce is going to lead to your destruction if you don't also focus on things that are more meaningful. And certainly, Yerushalayim being the center not only of commerce and economy, but also of morality, you could use a lesson from Yerushalayim. You shouldn't gloat at the downfall of Yerushalayim because it's going to lead to your own downfall. In the middle of this discussion of the various different wares that are brought, so not surprisingly, we find all the nations included, and we find that Yavan, who is of course, the heroes or the anti-heroes of Chanuka, are also listed on the charter of this boat, of the people who are bringing their wares. And lo and behold, if you look in Sefer Yechezkel, Perek Chav Zayin, you find that together with Tuval and a nation called Mashech, which is all provinces of the general Assyrian Greek Empire, it says that they are Hema Rochlayich, they are your merchants, they are the ones who are bringing you. Nefesh Adam, okay, they trade in slave trade, that's not going to be relevant for us right now. And in Nechoshes, in Klei Nechoshes. So here we have our first hint. Apparently, turns out that Yavan and the province from which the Syrian Greeks came to attack the Jewish people and take over Yerushalayim was actually rich in Nechoshet, in copper deposits, in bronze deposits. That was their national wares. just like every other nation brought whatever they particularly specialized in, we find that in Sefer Yechezkel, in the most unlikely of places, Divrei Torah are aniyim b'mkomon v'ashirim b'makom acher, we find an allusion to this idea that copper somehow relates to, or in just very simple historical terms, is the national goods of Yavan. Unbelievable. We find this again in Sefer Zechariah, in Perek Vav. Zechariah tells us see, Sefer Zechariah is a difficult sefer. At the beginning of Sefer Zechariah, the Ibn Ezra and other Mefarshim as well say that the reason Zechariah is so difficult is it's the end of the Second Temple period. Prophecy is about to disappear. It's the end of Nevuah. And as the faucet is being shut off and it's like dripping the last few drips that are left, so, Moshe Rabbeinu level of Nevuah is basically, Ko Amar Hashem, Zeh Hadavar, Moshe Rabbeinu has Aspaklar Meira. When he wants to say what Hashem wants to say, he just says it straight out. There's no funny business. You get to some of the middle prophets, and they'll sometimes use parables, but then they'll explain the parables. Sefer Zechariah is at the very end of the prophetic experience. It's like when Nevuah is just about done with. And there, the Ibn Ezra says, you know why Sefer Zechariah is so difficult? Because even Zechariah Hanavi HaKadosh himself didn't fully understand his prophecies. And then he says, good luck to me trying to write a commentary on it. If the Navi didn't understand it, how am I supposed to? He says, the only thing that I have on Zechariah that Zechariah didn't have is that I have a little bit more historical context, because these Nevuahs happened already. So I can look backwards and try to piece them together a little bit. Perek Vav in Sefer Zechariah begins with a very simple Nevuah, which is confusing in terms of what exactly it's relating to. But it's very simple. It's nothing fantastic. There are other Nevuahs that we read just this past Shabbos in the Haftorah of overflowing menorahs and, Satan standing next to the Kohen Gadol, very strange Nevuahs. This is a little bit easier. Perek Vav Pasuk Aleph. Vashuv v'asai inai v'arev hinei arba merkavos yatzos mibein shnei aharim. I saw chariots coming between two mountains. All of a sudden there were these chariots that were coming between these two mountains. V'haharim, and these mountains were harei nechoshes. The mountains were mountains made out of copper, out of nechoshes. Says the Malbim, and says many of the other Mefarshim, this is Zechariah, again, at the end of the second Beis HaMikdash period, that's when the Yavanim took over. It was during the temple was standing already. That the Harei Nechoshes is an emblem, is a symbol, is a prophetic symbol for the coming insurgence of the Greek exile that's about to happen. And it's described as Harei Nechoshes. Again, we understand why now, because we read Yechezkel, Perek Chav Zayin. Okay. So now we at least have a connection between Chanuka and Nechoshes. But before we start to make some seder of things, I want to grab one other piece that might be helpful to us soon enough. And that's from Sefer Daniel. And then we'll bring it to Tefillah also. I know we're supposed to speak about Tefillah. So Sefer Daniel. Sefer Daniel is also a wonderful sefer. Very hard sefer, because it's written in Aramaic, most of it. And Sefer Daniel begins with Daniel and several of his friends, who we know also from Tanakh, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Tanakh tells us that all four of them were taken to be court Jews, to be taken to the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, they were both, all of them were quite precocious. They were young, fairly young, and they were, sought after as advisors to the king. And so they were brought to the palace of Nebuchadnezzar. And Daniel begins with these, it starts with like an origin story. The four of them are brought to the palace, and they're basically handed over to a prison guard. It reminds us of Yosef, in the stories that we just read. There's actually many parallels between Daniel and Yosef. And Daniel is instructed, you have to make sure that you and all of these other Jewish prisoners, they're fed all types of luxurious foods, make sure that they stay healthy and well-trained for the king. And Daniel says, we keep strict glad kosher. I ordered the glad kosher meal on the plane, I'm going to pass on the, on the crab or whatever. We'll wait for the glad kosher meal. And the officer says, well, that's impossible. You need to eat meat. If you don't eat protein, how are you going to be able to be healthy for the king? So he says, listen, I'll make you a deal. Give us 10 days to just eat nuts and seeds and some berries. We're going to have a full diet of nuts, seeds, and berries. and you'll weigh us afterwards. You'll check our musculature, and you'll see if we can continue on this path. 10 days elapse, he does a test. Wow, unbelievable miracle. They're still completely healthy, and he lets them continue the rest of the time. This becomes a prototype for Esther Malka later, when she's in prison, that she also is going to be able to do this. Chazal tell us. Okay, that's the origin story. That's Parak Aleph of Daniel. Parak Beis begins with that's when the stuff starts, things start flying. So Nebuchadnezzar has a terrifying dream. And in his terrifying dream, he sees a huge monster, a mifletzet. And he wakes up from his dream, and he's deeply disturbed, and he calls all of his soothsayers and his advisors, including the Jews, and he says, problem, I just woke up from this terrifying dream. I have no idea what the dream was. I can't interpret it. I don't even remember the contents of the dream. I need you to tell me what the contents of the dream is, and I need you to tell me its interpretation. And all the advisors start saying, but Your Highness, we never heard of such a thing before. We've heard of people giving interpretations for dreams. I never heard of someone having to explain what the dream was and then interpret. He said, you're just trying to stall. I'm going to kill all of you. So Daniel comes forward and he says, listen, we've already, you've seen that we've proven ourselves. Give us a few days to daven. All dreams are interpreted by God anyway, again, mirroring Yosef HaTzadik. Give us a few days to pray to our God. Perhaps he'll be able to reveal the content of the dream and the interpretation. Well, lo and behold, Daniel goes and he davens, and the interpretation for the dream is revealed. And in the dream, he says, when he comes finally to Nebuchadnezzar and he tells him the dream, he says, in the dream, Your Highness, you saw this gigantic monster that was made out of various different types of material. The head was made out of pure gold. Reisha di dahav. The head is made out of pure gold. The arms and the upper chest was made out of silver. The lower waist and the thighs, going all the way down to the knees, is made out of nechoshes. It's made out of copper. And then from the bottom down, the calves and the feet are made out of an admixture. Really, the calves, it seems like, are made out of some sort of iron, barzel. And the feet themselves are made out of maybe pottery or something like pottery. And out of nowhere, you saw this dream. You saw a giant boulder came down and smashed the bottom of the feet that are made out of pottery, the most sensitive part. And that boulder smashed the feet, and all of a sudden the entire monster, this entire statue, came falling down. And the meaning of this dream is that you, Your Highness, are the most pure gold in the world, and of course are known throughout the world for being a genius, and so therefore, how fitting it would be that you would be called a head of gold. And after the Babylonians, there's going to be another nation, Paras Umadai, the Persians, the Medians and the Persians are going to come, and they're going to take over, and they are represented by the hands of Kesef. And after that, there's going to be another, and it's unbelievable, it's in Daniel, Beferish, all before it happens, a Nevuah. There's going to be another nation, and that's going to be the Yavanim, and they're going to come, and they're going to be like the copper thighs. And finally, there's going to be one further exile, that's going to be the fourth exile, and that's going to be a composite exile. It's going to have different components to it, some harder, some softer, and it's going to ultimately be that last exile, which is going to be broken, that God is going to bring my people finally back to Eretz Yisrael forever. And what you're seeing in this dream is the ultimate redemption of the Jewish people, and that is your dream. So we could probably spend several months interpreting this dream and going through Sefer Daniel, but all we want is one thing. And what we want now is we just got an amazing puzzle piece. And that is that not only is Yavan compared to copper, but they're compared to copper thighs. And that has to be understood now as well. If we can understand the copper and the thighs, we can understand a very, very profound secret to human psychology, to our own struggle in the question that I asked before about admitting when we need help and being a helper and not being in the limelight. And we can understand something profound about tefillah and about Chanuka, which will totally change the way that we relate to what tefillah is all about and what Chanuka really is all about. Okay, so thighs. Where can we find thighs? See, this is how you have to learn Torah. Where do we find thighs? So, anyone? I'll take suggestions. Yaakov gets hit in the thigh. Okay, excellent. I'll take it. Any other thighs by Yaakov? There is another thigh by Yaakov. What's that? Heel. Okay, Yaakov's the heel. Okay, heel. But I'm looking for thighs. I heard it. I don't know where it came from, but I almost heard it from two places at once. Right? There's a pasuk that says, Simna yadcha tachas yirechi, let your hand be under my thigh. Right? That's by Yaakov Avinu and by Avraham. That appears two places. So let's talk about that one first. So there's a famous Rashi, which is uncomfortable to say at the Shabbos table, where Rashi explains that Avraham and Yaakov are saying to Eved Avraham, which is probably Eliezer, according to Chazal, and Yosef HaTzadik in the case of Yaakov, where they're saying, I want you to take an oath that you're going to fulfill my request. In the case of Avram, to find a wife for Yitzchak. In the case of Yaakov, to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. I want you to take an oath by holding on to the one chefza shel kedusha that we have, which is the makom of the bris milah, or approximate the makom of the bris milah, which is called under the thigh. That's Rashi. But there is an unbelievable parish of Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, which is much more comfortable to say at the Shabbos table, and that is the following. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch is an unbelievable parish in these words. It's not an accident that both Avraham and Yaakov are on their deathbed or close to their death when they make the person who is representing them take this oath. Those are the only two places we find it. We need a little bit of fancy footwork here, as Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch knows how to do. And that is, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says, what is a hand and what is a thigh? So he says, if you look throughout Tanakh and also throughout Chazal, you'll find, especially in the laws of Nidarim, in Gittin as well, in the laws of Shlichus, in the laws of agency. So there's a whole discussion about the relationship between Yadayim, hands, and an agent. An agent is called Yado Arichta, it's called like the long hand of the person. If I make somebody my agent and they go to do something for me, it's as if my hand is stretching out to be able to go and do that. This may, by the way, I'm not going to get distracted by this right now, but this may be a way to resolve that famous Chazal that says that Bas Paro stretched out her hand like this, and according to the simple interpretation, she sent her Amma. It means she sent her agent, she sent somebody to go, it's the same thing. A stretching hand is someone else who's going to do something for you. So Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says, what would it mean? Well, let's talk about thighs first. What's a thigh? So anyone who's ever public transportation, so you know that if you're, I don't know who, I'm not saying bad about them, but whoever designed the things, they slip, they move, I don't know what that's about, but it's not so easy. Even if they were stable and they were holding on, in one place, I guess so you don't pull your arm out of your socket if it moves a little bit. But those things, if you're holding on with your hand and you're on the bus or you're on the train, if you're just standing there holding on to that, you don't have such stability. But if you can even get your thigh up against the wall or against one of the chairs, all of a sudden you have unbelievable stability. Thighs equals stability, or, put differently, self-sufficiency. The ability to hold oneself up, the biggest muscle in the entire human body. Right? The two pillars that held up the opening of the basement were called Yachin Uboaz, which is another name for the two thighs. They're pillars, they're support systems for the entire body. Says Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, someone who's about to leave the world and asks someone else to do something that they can't do for themselves anymore, might say, Simna yadcha, let your hand, your agency, your power of agency, be tachas. Tachas doesn't always mean under geographically. It also means instead of, like ayin tachat ayin, an eye instead of an eye. Let your hand be instead of my thigh. Put into plain English, let your ability to act on my behalf take the place of my inability to support myself because I am on the way out. Unbelievable. Beautiful. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. So what are copper thighs? What are copper thighs? So I'm going to take one tiny left turn, and then we're going to start pulling things all together. The word in Aramaic, but also in Hebrew, for nechoshes, is, what it says in Sefer Daniel is, Yarkasayach di nechash. Nechash being nechoshes. Now, that should remind us of something else. We need one more little puzzle piece. Where do we find a snake and we find nechoshes? The Nachash and nechoshes by Moshe Rabbeinu. By Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu teaches us about a Nachash HaNechoshes. Rashi tells us that even though Hashem told Moshe to make a saraf, not a Nachash, Moshe said another word for a saraf is a Nachash. In fact, that's the primary name for the animal. Saraf is just a species of Nachash. And the Nachash, which is a snake, sounds awfully like the word Nechoshes. Now, in Lashon HaKodesh, things that sound similar to each other are similar to each other. In any other language, there's something called the theory of arbitrariness. There was a fellow who won the Nobel Prize for this. His name was Ferdinand de Saussure. He won a Nobel Prize for pointing out that the word tree and the concept of the woody substance of a tree have nothing to do with each other, so that you can't really make any smuchin, you can't make any drushas from like, I read a book and the color red. They have nothing to do with each other. They're both arbitrary words that we use to designate speaking about a book or a color. But the word nachash and nachoshes, because they are made up of the same letters, they have to be related to each other in some way. Which brings us, of course, to this inyan of the nachash. What's the nachash? So the nachash, amazingly, if we go all the way back to the beginning, now we're going to travel through history very quickly. Let's start with the nachash. The nachash offers Adam and Chava something which is almost irresistible. What he offers Adam and Chava is not the tree. The tree is just the means to the ends of getting this. What the nachash offers Adam and Chava is the ability to make their own worlds. Remember this, Rashi? If you'll eat from the tree, vayisem ke'elokim, or ke'elohim, you'll be like God. Rashi writes, you'll be able to make your own worlds. Making your own world here doesn't mean, making another cosmos or another, area of the universe. Like the phrase, she lives in her own world, he lives in his own world. It means you'll be able to construct reality the way that you see fit through your own eyes, through your own prism. You'll be completely self-sufficient in the way that you see the world. You'll be able to stand on your own moral two thighs, so to speak. The Nachash offers all of humanity, offers Adam and Chava, the ability to make their own world and to see the world perfectly through the prism of their own understanding, without any need for outside verification. This poison of the snake, which entered humanity at that point, has a rich history that travels throughout all of history and comes ad yom hazeh to even the person who's holding this microphone. These characters of Tanakh, the Nachash and Adam and Chava, and in a moment we'll jump to Noach and his 3 sons, they're all still alive. They exist in here. They exist inside of us. And the Torah is not just interested in telling us about people who lived a long time ago. It's interested in trying to figure out the contradictions inside of us and try to make some sense out of it. If a rabbi stands up usually and gives a drasha and he resolves 2 contradictions between a pasuk in this sefer and a pasuk in that sefer, nobody gets upset. But if the rabbi starts poking around at the internal contradictions of the person, rabbi, whoa, hold on a second, that's like getting a little, hold on, just a little current events and a little put the psukim together and leave us alone. So I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna try to resolve any contradictions. I'm just gonna point out some contradictions. The basic place where we can find the essence of all personality strengths and flaws is in the first people to inhabit the second iteration of planet Earth, which is the 3 sons of Noach. This is an amazing thing, which if we had more time, maybe another time, we'll study together. But on the most basic level, the names of these 3 characters are not just names, but they're personalities, they're archetypes. In very quick terms, Yefet means beauty, and it means attraction. It means the ability to attract, to pull. Cham means passion. It means hot, but it means passion. Right? It could be passionate love or passionate anger, but it means passion. It's funny because it could be both, right? You could be passionately angry, and you could be passionately in love. Cham represents passion. And Shem, which means name or identity or essence, means trying to get to the internal character of the thing. Trying to chase after the seichel shebadavar, the intellectual thing that's there. And they almost set up as a beautiful, the 3 of them set up, the head is the seat of wisdom, of shame. Then you have the heart, which is the place of beauty, of attraction. And you have the stomach area, which is the place of the passions. And there's almost this paradigm that the 3 of them are 3 lenses to look at creation through. Now, here's the last piece, put it all together. Yefes, in the aftermath of whatever happens there after Noach comes off the Teva, is given a blessing in disguise where Noach says to him, Yaft Elokim leYefes. Yefes, you're very powerful. You have beauty, and almost as a definitional quality, beauty means the ability to attract, to pull. But exactly where you're going to pull is slightly subject to the discretion of how you orient yourself. Yaft Elokim liyefes. God gave you this magnetic, charismatic attractiveness. But that attractiveness has to be put in the tense of shame. Shin mem, not S-H-A-M-E. In the tense of shame. Otherwise, you'll end up in the tense of shame, which is S-H-A-M-E, of cham. Because that power of attraction, if not properly sourced in the tense of shin mem, of shame, of ethical morality, of looking at things for what the essence of what they are, will slowly become coarse and ugly and violent. So shame is your place. You have to go. Now here is where we get into a lot of trouble. Because as I told you before, the snake offered reality to humankind that we should be able to manipulate things however we want. We should be completely self-sufficient in our way of orienting ourselves through the world. And Yefes, who are the great-great-grandparents of Yavan, Yefes can't handle, and neither can Dovid'l, can't handle being told, you have unbelievable worth. God has blessed you, but only if you're in the tense of shame. Your worth, your beauty is contingent. It depends on you being second to shame. You need to enter into his domain and be moved by the guidance of the spiritual and religious enterprises of shame in order to find your beauty. Otherwise, you'll be co-opted and corrupted to the tense of cham. At first, this maybe doesn't sound so bad, but over history, this becomes a movement which becomes impossibly irresistible they reject completely this notion that we need to be second. The Ramban in Parshas Achrei Mos, now this is a shir ostensibly also on Zos Chanuka. One of the big ideas about Zos Chanuka is that Zos Chanuka is the end of the entire Yom Kippur story. What began on Yom Kippur with the judgment of Yom Kippur, if you look in the Zohar says that the final judgment, you could still, there's like little emendations you can make to the contract on the bottom, and the little letters could be added until Zos Chanuka, until the last day of Chanuka. By Yom Kippur, there's something that the Torah tells us, Bezos yavo Aaron el kodesh. Bezos yavo Aaron el kodesh. With this, Aaron can come into holiness. And what is the Zos? What is the this? In Parshas Achrei Mos, that Zos yavo Aaron el kodesh is immediately followed by telling us about this lottery that takes place. A lottery between two goats, one goat which ends up going into the Kodesh Kodashim, or approximately the Kodesh Kodashim, and the other one which has a very bad end. Sounds very familiar, sounds very similar. This power of the lottery is described by the Ramban. The Ramban, in his commentary to Chumash, writes there that this lottery is the exact opposite hanhaga, the exact opposite way of acting from the Yavanim. He even says from the cursed Aristo, harsh words, the cursed Aristo, the hero of Rambam, Aristotle, who could only rely on that which his own mind understood, and anything which could not self-referentially be proven could not be the truth. That's what the Ramban writes. This lottery, what's the lottery? The lottery is saying, I don't know how to decide between these two goats. They both look equally the same. They were purchased for the same amount of money. They're the same height. The lottery, this goral is going to determine what goes to the Kodesh Kodashim and what's thrown off of a cliff. This refusal to receive wisdom from anywhere except for your own understanding is the root of the koach of Yavan. Yavan's self-sufficiency, the copper thighs, the inability to make space for someone else to be able to guide you, to push you in the right direction. The Gemara says, unbelievably, that if a person doesn't, this needs to be explained also, the Gemara says in B'Seches Bava Kama that if a person doesn't bow in Modim, in the right spot, after many, many years, after 70 years, their spine will start to turn into a snake. It means their spine will start to bend automatically. Modim, Hoda'ah, saying thank you, saying I can't do this by myself, saying I need some outside reference point in order to make my life go in the right direction, is the exact opposite of the path of Yavan that says, I cannot bow to anybody else. I have copper thighs. And in fact, if you remember what Daniel said, it actually, the starting point for the copper is from the lower waist down all the way to the knees, which is all that, literally from the waist to the thighs to the knees, all the things that you need in order to properly bow. The copper thighs of Yavan, therefore, is an unbelievable insight into the problem that keeps us from being able to admit that we need help. I'll tell you an amazing teaching from Rav Hutner. Rav Yitzchak Hutner, the great Rosh Hashiva, said that the word hodah means two different things in Jewish consciousness. On the one hand, it means to thank, as we know from Chanuka, lahodos ulahalal, to thank. But in a court system, in Choshen Mishpat, lahodot means to admit, to admit. Hodas baldin, right? The admission of the defendant. If he, after being accused, admits that he stole the money, so then he's for sure guilty. Hodas baldin. Rav Hutner says, and this is the core, this is the linchpin, every admission that a person has to make, it hurts a little bit. Just like when you admit that you did something wrong, and you admit in court, there's a payment that you're making because of that. Thanking is no different. Every time we have to say thank you, we're making an admission. We're saying, I could not possibly have done this by myself. Every time a person looks at another person sincerely, and the hardest thing in the world to do, to say, I can't do this by myself anymore, I'm not capable, I'll share something personal. Not to give anyone, but about 6 years ago, I was diagnosed with T-cell lymphoma. Baruch Hashem, Baruch Rofei Cholim, I've been healthy now for 6 years. One of the most difficult transitions, went back to America, not because the medical system here is not good, it's amazing, it's just we didn't have any, now Baruch Hashem, we have some family here, at the time we didn't have any family, so my parents and brothers are all there, it would have been easier for us to go there. Chas v'shalom, no one should think that the medical system in Eretz Yisrael is not top-notch. When I would tell the people who the doctor was in Eretz Yisrael, they'd say, oh, she goes to all the medical conferences, he's like the top. So, one of the most difficult transitions was, as a person who, I teach Torah, I teach Torah both to adults and to young men in the old city of Yerushalayim, in a yeshiva called Yeshiva D'Oraita, and some other yeshivas and seminaries as well. So in my role as a Torah teacher, somebody once asked Rav Chaim Brisker, what is the definition of a rabbi, I guess you're talking about a community rabbi, and Rav Chaim Brisker said, chesed, that's what it is, and that's the truth. Right? Sometimes chesed is through intellectual gifts, sometimes chesed is through helping other people who are having financial issues, marital issues. This comes to your plate if you teach Torah. That's why rabbis should probably get some sort of degree in some sort of mental health profession. They shouldn't just you're helping people all the time. So typically, my wife and I were on the end of giving to other people. All of a sudden, we found ourselves in this role where we had to admit, can't do it on our own. Not possible. Not only do we need help from parents and siblings, but we needed help from community members. I remember there's a family who used to drop off, as if this was what I was supposed to be eating at the time. They used to drop off Rice Krispie treats, like the Rice Krispies in the fluff. They used every Erev Shabbos, Rice Krispie treats and flowers. Another person used to drive my kids to school. All these things. And if you're anything like any other human being I've ever met, it's very hard to accept all this help. And to then sincerely look at the other person and say, I could not have done this without you. To admit to giving thanks. To give thanks and to admit that you couldn't do it by yourself. Yavan, in the face of standing before shame, says to shame, we don't need you. We can do this on our own. We have our own logical systems. The snake already promised us we can make worlds of our own. We don't need some direction from God that was revealed to you in the year 2448 at Sinai and that you've been passing down faithfully. We don't need your help. We can do this on our own. And the sense that we're second fiddle to you, please, and no thank you. This is the place of Yavan in history. The refusal to bow. There's a Mishnah in Maseches Midos. Maseches Midos is a fascinating Masechta, as they all are. But it's especially fascinating because it goes through, if you like architecture, it goes through the architecture of the Beis HaMikdash. Even sometimes there's like pictures of the Mizbeach and the different walls and the chambers of the Beis HaMikdash. Fascinating Masechta. In the third parak of Maseches Midos, we find a description of something called the soreg. Apologize, I think it's in the second. It's the third Mishnah in the second. Second chapter, third Mishnah. So describing the various walls, there's a wall of Harbayas and there's a wall of the Beis HaMikdash itself. There's different walls. One of the walls that we find in the Beis HaMikdash is something called the soreg. Now the soreg is a fascinating piece of architecture. It's a fascinating structure. The soreg is about, probably a little shorter than this, probably about this high. Maybe as high as the benches. 10 tfachim, which is a familiar number for Chanuka. 10 tfachim tall. And the soreg, the Mefarshim explained to us, is the wall, is kind of like the yellow tape or the red tape that says, Ad Kan, non-Jews. The Beis Tefillah Kol Ha'amim, the Beis HaMikdash is a place for everybody, and it really is. But just like the Kohanim are only allowed to go into certain places, so the Leviim are only allowed to go into certain places, the Yisraelim are only allowed to go into certain places, so nations of the world, right? We welcome all the types of converts, but in all the nations of the world, this is the place where you have to stand. When the Yavanim saw this, says the Mishnah, listen to this, it's an unbelievable Mishnah. And it explains the line in Maos Tzor that, maybe you didn't know what exactly it was talking about. Soreg gavo asar tfachim, v'shlosh esrei pratzos hayusham. There were 13 breaches in the soreg. There were 13 breaches in the wall of the soreg. Shepartzu malachei Yavan, that the kings of Yavan made in the soreg. You can understand why they made this. They want to be self-sufficient. They don't want to have to rely on anybody else. Chazru v'gadram v'gadru kenegdam shlosh esrei shtachavayos. Amazing. The Mishnah says 13 breaches in the wall of the soreg were made by the kings of Yavan, and when the Chashmonaim came and they restored the Beis HaMikdash to its proper glory, they patched up these 13 breaches and made a gezerah that anyone who passes by these 13 places has to bow. You hear how it all comes together? They have to bow, and this, if we would have just read this on its own, it would have been poor in its place. Now we have some of the pieces of the puzzle together. When they bowed, they were saying, you think that we're trying to say that we're better than you? We're not better than you. You're not second to us. You're second, we're first. No. You're second, and we're second, and everybody's second to Hashem. That's it. This soreg, which you felt the need to breach because you said, I need to have equal access, otherwise it must be second place. They put it back together. They said, that's not the pshat, and we'll prove it to you. Every time we pass it, we're going to fall on our hands and feet, and we're going to show that we're also nothing compared to Hashem. The whole tachlis of this thing is just that there's different places. There's the place the Kohanim go, the place the Leviim go, the place everybody has their place in Hashem's world. And so they made keneged these 13 breaches, 13 ishtachavayos. The place of the Beis HaMikdash is a place of ishtachavaya, of bowing to Hashem, of hodah, of admission that the world cannot function without Hashem. All of tefillah is standing before Hashem. It's true there's 3 different types of tefillah, technically. But all of tefillah is leading up to the bechir sheba tefillos. The bechir sheba tefillos, the tefillah which will never expire, Chazal say that the only korban, tefillos are connected to korbanos. The only korban that will continue into the times of Mashiach, la'asid lavo, is the korban toda. The korban toda doesn't only mean that we're going to say thank you to Hashem. The korban toda means that at the end of everything, when we finally turn around and we realize that everything that we did was only with the help of Hashem, because the heart doesn't beat without Hashem, because the mind doesn't work with Hashem, because the stomach doesn't even growl and get hungry, and our need to go to sleep, all of that is being orchestrated by Hashem. And it's true that there's a place of free choice, but at la'asid lavo, the glory of Hashem is going to be when we turn around and we say, Hodah, Hodah, Hodah. The nace that happened, that we were able to serve Hashem, will all be clearly seen as being biyad Hashem. The fact that we were able to serve Hashem is going to be completely biyad Hashem. 2 more things, because we're almost out of time. Number 1, the Medrash tells us that the Nachash, originally going back to that Nachash, it's a medrash in the Pirkei de Eliezer, that the Nachash originally in Gan Eden was supposed to be, gives a little motivation into why the Nachash did what he did. It says that the Nechashim, all the Nechashim were supposed to be Shamashim, they were supposed to be servants for Adam and Chava. They're supposed to bring them food and drink, standing there with the palm fronds, or I don't know, it doesn't say that, but they're supposed to, be waiting on the beck and call of Adam and Chava, everything they wanted. The Nachash said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be your servant so that the human being could be the crown jewel of creation. The Nachash refused. In fact, Chazal say that the Nachash used to be able to stand up also. Now the Nachash is in a permanent state of Ishtachavaya. The Nachash is in a permanent state of Ishtachavaya. The koach of being a shamish, which the Nachash was relegated to, so to speak, in his own eyes, is a great honor. He could have been, he should have been, the shamish for Adam and Chava. Go back to our original question. Well, not our original question. We'll go back to that in a minute. We had asked, what is the remez? Nechoshes is Roshei Tevos, Neiros Chanuka, Shamish Tadlik. I ask you this, who is the hero of the Chanuka candles? So, on the one hand, of course, it's Haneros Halalu Kodeshem, it's the holy candles. On the other hand, Ein lanu reshus lishtamesh b'hem ela lirosim bilvad. Ein lanu reshus lishtamesh b'hem ela lirosim bilvad. Except for the fact that we have the shamish. The shamish is the candle that lights all the other candles and gives them some utility. The candles of Chanukah themselves, that's the light that's holy. That's Hashem's light. That's Hashem's doing. The shamish is not Yavan. It could have been Yavan if they would have played their hands right. Because there's an aspect, and it could be the Yavan inside of us if we play it right. The shamish is the understanding that a person can finally come to grasp. That being a shamish, to light Hashem's candles, to be a shliach for Hashem, to be the shamish to something bigger than oneself, and to say, I don't have value without you, to admit, to thank and to admit, I can't, none of this makes any sense without you, Hashem. And at the same time to also recognize, like I said before, I'm not the center of the show. Really, of course, Haneros Halalu Kodeshem, that's the whole thing of Chanukah. But for them to have any utility for me, I need to have a shamish. I need to be a shamish. So I want to end with a story. Story about Rabbi Akiva Eger. Rabbi Akiva Eger, one time, had 2 bris milas. He was double booked. Another problem that rabbis sometimes face. One of them was for a family member, and one was for a student. So of course the family member went out, but he didn't want to completely abandon the student, a very close student, and he said to one of his students, Simna yadcha tachas rechi. No, he didn't say that. He said, be my agent. I want you to go. I can't possibly dance at both weddings. So I want, or bris milas in this case. I want you to go and represent me at the second bris milah. So the guy said, Rabbi, anything for you, of course, no problem. So the fellow sets out for the bris milah, gets there a little bit early, wants to make sure he's right there, representing his Rabbi Akiva Eger. And Rabbi Akiva Eger has complete trust in this fellow. He arrives at the bris milah, he's a little early, he's sitting in the back corner. He gets there before the family even. When the father and the mother of the baby come finally to start setting up a little bit before davening, they see this fellow sitting in the corner and they say, what are you doing here? So he says, oh, Mazel Tov, we don't know each other. We're both fellow students of Rabbi Akiva Eger, different years. I'm like, from the 13th year, and he's from the 17th year of the yeshiva, whatever it is. We don't know each other, but I came to represent our Rabbi Akiva Eger. So he said, wow, I'm so touched. The Rabbi remembered, and he followed up about the bris, and wow, unbelievable. Thank you so much for coming. So the fellow sits in the back. He's preparing for davening. They daven, kvater, bris, the whole thing. So the guy goes over to him at the end, and he says, thank you so much for coming. You don't have to stay, but there's going to be a meal downstairs. You're welcome to come you traveled all this way. Might as well join us for the meal. So the fellow says, oh, that's so kind of you. Yes, I was planning on staying. Anyway, thank you so much. He goes down and he sits down. He washes probably a bagel and lox. You know how it is, even back then. So he sits down for his meal. And there's some speeches and the whole thing. The meal goes on for an hour, and the guy's still sitting there. At some point, the guy comes over and says, like, it's okay, you can leave. You don't have to stay for the, Yamli Abasha. There's like special Zmiros things. You could leave. It's okay. So the guy says, no. Anyway, he makes an excuse. No, anyway, I wasn't planning on benching with 10 people. Okay. So finally they get to benching, and they bench. And everybody starts to pack up their, little sandwich bags or whatever, and this guy is just still sitting there. And they're sweeping up, and he's just sitting there. And it's a little uncomfortable, but, eventually, after like another half hour passes, the guy's just sitting there at the table. And the guy walks over and says, like, it's really okay, you can leave. Like, everyone else left already, like, you're allowed to go. And the guy looks at the Baal Bris, looks at him with utter seriousness, and he looks him in the eyes and he says, you know that our sages say that shlucho shel adam kamoso, a person who is representing as an agent for another person, he is like that person. How often do I get to be Rabbi Akiva Eger? He said, I'm not going anywhere. How often do I get to be Rabbi Akiva Eger? I'm sitting here for as long as I can. As long as I'm his agent, I get to be like Rabbi Akiva Eger. Friends, how often do we get to be like Hashem? And the answer is, it depends how much we work on our tefillah in a way where we become shamashim, where we become agents for Hashem's will in the world. To the degree that we get rid of the copper thighs, we melt the copper thighs, that we remove the poison of the nachash, that we believe that Hashem is pulling the strings and Hashem is running the show, and that we have the courage to admit, not just to Hashem, but to other people who are helping us on that journey, who we could say, I literally could not serve Hashem without you. We're at a time now when if only, and I'll end with this as a bracha, if only the Jewish people were able to see that those who are studying Torah and those who are fighting, if we could thank one another, if we could admit to one another, there's no way we could be doing this without one another. If it was possible for those who are fighting to say to those who are learning Torah, there is no way we could possibly fire one bullet in the right address without, or hopefully more defend things that are falling, until people put down and beat their swords into plowshares. Until that time, there is no way that we could be defending the Jewish people and proactively fighting. There is no way that we could do that without your Torah study. And if the people who are studying Torah said, there is no way that we could possibly have the shalvas hanefesh to sit and to study Torah if not for the fact that you were protecting us, that we're being defended. If we could look at each other in that way, if we could look to Hashem and say, how often do we get to represent one another? How often do we get to represent Hashem? So then we'll be sitting constantly at a simcha, at a party that we'll never want to leave. Hashem should help us, that we should be zocheh to be admitters, to be thankers, to be people who are grateful to their Ribono Shel Olam, to each other, and that merit will be zocheh to the geula shlema of amitas b'mheira menu amen v'amen.